biodiversity in this area is going to affect all the species in the long term, and it's probably going to have a lot of negative consequences for these local ecosystems. So because we're experiencing severe declines in most of our species, bats in general are in trouble. It's important that we do everything we can to conserve them right now. So I'm just going to cover some basic bat facts, why we want to conserve bats, why they're useful for us, and what we can do to help. So one reason that we should like bats is their eating habits should really appeal to us. Around the world, there are a lot of bats that feed on fruit or nectar, and these bats that are frugivorous or feed on nectar, they really help pollinate a lot of important plant species. Bats are the #1 pollinator for the saguaro cactus in the Sonoran Desert and the baobab tree in Africa. And most of the world's bats, about 70% worldwide, are insectivorous, and all of our local species are insectivorous. So they feed primarily on bugs, and they reduce the number of insect pests that we have to deal with, reduce insect-borne disease, and it's been estimated that bats save the U.S. agricultural industry at least $10 billion each year in crop damage and pesticide costs. Guano has served a variety of purposes over the years. One of the more interesting purposes is it served as gunpowder in the U.S. Civil War. And it's useful because when it builds up in caves over long periods of time, it actually forms these strata by which climatologists, biologists can look at climate changes, sometimes over millions of years, by looking at these strata. And then the most common use of guano today is probably as an organic fertilizer. It's a very organic, sustainable fertilizer when harvested sustainably. It has a really high nitrogen and phosphorus content, and it doesn't smell as bad as like horse manure and some of those other organic fertilizers. However, sustainable harvest is a really big issue still because bats are so important to delicate cave ecosystems. Removing that guano could really disturb the ecosystem and disturb bats themselves. Disturbance in caves could lead bats to leave their caves, abandon their pups. So Bat Conservation International and some partners, they're really developing some standardized protocols for harvesting guano from caves, and hopefully soon we'll be able to use this really good organic fertilizer in our lawns with a cleaner conscience. So we know bats are important. How can we contribute to bat conservation? Well, one thing we can do is avoid further spreading white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is now confirmed in 20 U.S. states and 5 Canadian provinces from back in 2007 when it was only located in New York State, so it's spreading pretty rapidly. And it's suspected that the reason it was first brought to North America from Europe is because of human activity in caves. So the fungus can latch on to human clothing and gear and be easily transmitted cave to cave in that way. As a result, a lot of public and private caves are being gated off to prevent visitors from going in. But they're not all blocked off, so if you are a hardcore spelunker, try to watch your activity in caves, even if proper decontamination protocols are followed before and after cave visits. Just going in there with your lights and loud noises, that could disturb bats enough to have them arousing from hibernation prematurely. And when they're trying to fight off white nose syndrome, it's best to disturb them as little as possible. Along those lines, don't kill or disturb bats you might find in your home or outside. If you do find a bat in your home, you can take them to the New Jersey Bat Sanctuary. Jackie Kashmir runs that. She rehabilitates bats. Even if they have white nose syndrome, she's able to cure them of white nose syndrome inside her facility and release them back into the wild on a single case basis. And if you have a bat problem in your house, if you have a lot of bats taking up residence in your house, because they do often like to roost inside buildings and structures, you can contact Garden State Wildlife Control or Bat Conservation Management. These websites here are also located in a brochure I can pass around at the end. But these websites provide you with tips on how to conduct your own bat exclusion if you'd rather not go through the officials. It's best to do this after the bats' pups are able to fly in the fall, because if you try to conduct an exclusion before then, bats can end up getting trapped inside your house. However, excluding bats from your house is easier said than done. You might just be wiser to consult a professional, because they fit in really tight nooks and crannies, and once they get set on a roost, they want to just keep going back in there until there's no possible way for them to get back in. Another thing you can do to contribute is put up bat boxes, especially before you exclude any bats from your home. There are some species that really love roosting in these bat boxes, and if you follow the proper guidelines for bat box placement, size, and structure, you are very likely to get bats roosting in your bat box. So you can find these proper guidelines at Bat Conservation. Bat Conservation International, which is batcon.org, and Bat Conservation Management. Their web pages provide extensive guidelines on constructing, installing, where to place your bat boxes. And I'll give you a little bit more tips on that. So, if you want bats to come visit your bat boxes and come onto your property, the number one thing to remember is bats have to find the boxes on their own. There are some commercial lures out there that claim to be able to draw bats in. Some people try to use guano or try to catch or purchase bats and put them inside the bat box to attract more. The latter is illegal, and none of these methods are known to work. So you just have to follow the guidelines and hope that bats find these boxes on their own, which they probably will if it's set up correctly. The two major factors in occupancy success are temperature and water availability. So bats like an internal temperature in their daytime roosts of 80 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty hot. So the bat boxes need to get plenty of sunlight, and it's a little bit harder in temperate climates like the one we live in to get temperatures to get that high just from sunlight alone. So dark paint really helps to trap solar radiation. Painting your bat boxes dark will help if you can't get enough sunlight on them. So in this area where daily highs in July rarely average above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, bat boxes should receive at least 10 hours of direct daily sunlight. And usually the best direction to face them in to get the most sunlight is south facing. So it's important to make your bat boxes available by late March. This is when bats start coming back to their summer roosting grounds from either hibernation or migration. And where they might take up your boxes later in the summer, it's best that they see that they're there and get used to them as early as possible. Mount boxes as high as you can. Generally, the higher you can get them, the more successful they'll be. And mount them on buildings or poles. If you try to mount a bat box on a tree, it's probably not going to be successful. For some reason, even though bats will naturally roost in trees, they don't like to roost in bat boxes on trees. And those mounted to metal siding are also usually unsuccessful. So buildings that are not covered in metal siding and poles are your best bet. It's important to make sure the bat boxes are properly sealed to restrict moisture. And another way to help attract bats to your yard, this is not something that's like easily managed, but just having trees, water, and light sources available on your property are all good things. If you have some leeway with placement, water availability is the second biggest factor in occupancy success. And there was this large-scale study conducted by Bat Conservation International that found 83% success rate in bat boxes that received at least 4 hours of direct daily sunlight and were located 0.4 miles from a natural water source. So it seems like if you have a water source, you don't even need to meet that minimum requirement of 10 hours of direct daily sunlight. Trees and forested corridors are all very good too. You could also have light sources on your property. Don't really want to encourage light pollution, but if there's a big street light or something, this might be a good area to place a bat box because it'll attract insects and it'll attract bats. These are bats flying around, and these are moths. So another way you can contribute to bat conservation is just to avoid using pesticides in your lawn or garden. Pesticides can pose a huge risk to insectivorous bats because when they eat insects that are contaminated, they can become contaminated themselves. And while the U.S. Agricultural industry, the large-scale agricultural farms, are the biggest culprits of this, reducing pesticide use in your own lawn or garden will definitely help, especially if you're trying to attract bats there and putting up bat boxes. Another thing you can do is just protect bat habitat. In general, bats really like trees. They like these forested corridors or riparian corridors. Try to leave as many trees on your property as you can if you're thinking about bats. There are certain species that bats prefer over others. This is a shagbark hickory tree. Indiana bats really love these. They crawl up underneath the peeling bark and roost under there. So even if the tree is alive, it has a lot of little cracks and crevices for the bat to roost. And dead and dying trees are also great roosts for bats because they have lots of cracks and crevices. So if you have this ugly snag in your yard, if it doesn't need to be cut down, maybe leave it up for bats. They could be using it as a roost. Final thing you can do is support bat research and conservation organizations. Organization for Bat Conservation, Bat Conservation International, Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey, they all take private donations to help bat research. The Save Lucy campaign was developed specifically to spread awareness over white nose syndrome and look for possible mitigation tactics. So they also accept donations. So yeah, there are a lot of organizations out there that are trying to help bat conservation, and they're one outlet by which we can help.